Welcome to episode 43 of the International Web Effectiveness Podcast. I'm Bill Scully, and as always, joined by Bill Hunt. We're here to help you improve your web presence and manage your global websites more effectively. Today, we're talking about what Bill's ideas are about Google I/O 2026 and what others in the industry are also saying about it and some of the things that we're seeing with our clients. But before we get into it, I'd like to ask you to please subscribe so that you never miss an episode. And if you're enjoying the show, tell someone and leave us a review. Reviews help keep us going and help the new listeners find us. In our last episode, episode 42, Frustrated by Friction, we talked about why websites kill business when they make users work too hard. Today's topic builds on that. Many I/O announcements push more friction onto site owners, not the users. So, Bill, how's it going? It's been it feels like a month already.
Yeah, it's been a while. Everything's good here. Can't even keep up with all the announcements from everybody, and announcements about announcements. So it's a lot of moving parts out there right now.
So crazy. And I'm sure you're doing all kinds of vibe coding and stuff and learning new stuff. You got to love what we do. So today we're talking about I/O 2026. Anything that you saw that you were surprised with? Anything that you already saw coming? What are your thoughts there?
I had four main takeaways. Really what surprised me was the lack of any kind of hedge by Google on the topic of, search is agentic. That it is and will be AI mode or AI overviews. I mean, it's here. And they were saying it's the fact and get with it. And the other thing in parallel to that was how strongly, broadly, enthusiastically they talked about that the website was just one of the many components they would call. I thought that was really interesting that they've always alluded to that, any digital asset is fair game, whether it's YouTube. And we've seen this with the SERP structure change that based on your query, Google may serve ads or local or whatever. The SERP landscape changed. And I think now they sort of doubled down on that. I think this is the new normal and we need to think about this. The second one is along those lines, right? There's the trajectory. They're moving fast. And they literally said AI mode is the power user in search. And that now Gemini sits in front of that. And I know a prior episode we talked about in December when Google first introduced Gemini into the equation, how that the context of the query, the user, the alignment between what the user asked for and the site that was presented radically changed. And we saw this with real data that you may have been a great answer before, but in the context, and the one I remember most vividly was a query related to issues with contact lenses, specifically color contact lenses. This one site had been rocking it. They were like number one or number two for years. And they only talked about contact lenses. So once Gemini is in the equation, it looked for answers specific to color contacts. And so because of that, this site that it was broadly contacts got knocked out.
Yeah.
And then when they re-edited the page to make it more inclusive of contacts and color contacts, they came back. And so that's where I think Gemini is, working hard. And that's why I think a lot of people are complaining the results aren't what they expected, especially if they're not theirs. But if we look at the context of the prompt, I think that's big. And the third one, we'll get into a couple of these. The third one was...
Before you get into that, so yeah. Elizabeth Reed, Google Search VP.
Yep.
She said, AI mode has surpassed 1 billion monthly users, with queries more than doubling every quarter since launch.
There we go.
That's crazy.
And when you have Gemini in there, and I think Bright Edge did a study that found within, 9 vertical sectors, 48% or more of the prompts they were testing or queries they were testing, there was an AI overview. So that's an interesting thing. And again, where this fits in was this morning I'm advising this agency, and they were doing a readout of a presentation they're going to give to the client that was, sort of wanting to know why they had declined. And before that, they had just sort of given them these there was a May update and there was this update. And, oh yeah, your impressions got hosed because Google recalculated. They were overestimating your impressions. And sure, we can just tell them this. And I said, but how about we try to figure out facts? And what was interesting is some of the queries that had the biggest decline, both in clicks and impressions, they didn't meet this relevance threshold, if you will. There was now an AI answer answering it, or there was a better not AI overview, but instant answer that was answering it from somebody else that was better than them. And when you actually looked at the page, their page about a question about them was very rudimentary and ambiguous. And this blogger made it very complete answer.
Yeah.
Right. So even though they were the best and historically in search, they would have been the answer, even though they were ambiguous, because they can interpret better your question and they can evaluate. And I think this is a big thing we'll talk about in a moment. I think not enough people are getting this, that there's an entire rubric that's happening before you can even be considered to be an answer. And I think that's a podcast all in itself. And, I've tried to talk about these eligibility gates and nobody gives a shit. I'm starting to see people talk about gates, that there's this gating going on. And again, I wrote about this a year ago and we talked about it, the whole absolute, why the hell is an absolute showing up in a question about vodka? And why isn't it showing up when we want to know the best vodka for making drinks? And then we did that. We broke it down and we could see exactly why they weren't.
Yeah.
And I think that's happening on all of these queries now because Gemini can do that. And anything that's got this qualitative adjective, where it's a best or fastest or cheapest or anything that has, for business size, which people are doing now. Again, that's the whole extended query. And this is sort of what Liz is talking about is people now, they know, instead of being lazy, and here's the opposite problem. If I wanted something near me, Google took all the hard work of me actually stating where I am, and it used my IP and served that. So now to be in some of those queries, I may have to actually state where I am or the context that I want, in AI, because they're not really doing the location thing. If I want the best Thai restaurant, they're going to give me the best Thai restaurant, and I'm finding it's not always the one nearest me.
Right.
And that's a whole international implication that, I'm presenting on next week. But I think that's what's happening, right? They can because of what Gemini is able to do, and they're able to get that answer. And then, so the third and fourth, so the third one, and then we'll get into some of these. I think in their product language, specifically, what they're doing in dev tools and what they're doing in some of the different things that I noted, fast, legible, these are the baseline for playing now, right? So if you don't have a fast website to where they can ping it and get the answer, because if you do some of these prompts now or queries, it'll tell you how many milliseconds it took to form an answer. Right. And so if you've got this old clunky not old, it's probably rebuilt a month ago, these overly brand centric, overly creative website where we've dumbed down all of our answers for, millennial grazing and Gen Z grazing, none of that's going to answer any of these questions.
Right.
And I think they're telling us that. And if you look at what they put into Chrome dev tools, it's all there.
Exactly. Everybody's focused on these content blocks and answering the questions. And, as technical SEOs, we need to be thinking about, how do you even get considered? And, speed, JavaScript, all of these things can influence if you're even considered.
Exactly. If they can't get to you. And so my fourth one was, it's like, oh my God, web effectiveness now is critical.
Yes.
It's like we've made it to the mainstream, but nobody knows about it,
That's
right?
right.
So
That's right.
if we do take your line of thought that, yeah, all this, structuring content and creating like these chunks and all this other and having like 9,000 thread arguments about LLMS text files and the 18 different formats that people are coming out with for MD files and entity graphs and all of this other stuff, and stopping and saying, can they even get to my page? All right. And so are they finding it? And do we have the answer? And at the end of it, now this is like, oh my God, this is all web effectiveness. And, I want to close out with this whole test in Lighthouse for being agentic ready. And we were talking just before we went live, the common crawl agentic test that came out and that Cyrus and a few other people have been talking about, are you agentic ready? So this is common crawl, where many of these AI people get their content from. They suck it out of common crawl. And so here's the crawl or retrieval portion of this saying, yeah, there's things you got to think about. And then Bastian Grimm just did a report today that said, less than 2% of companies of like the 8 or 12 things you need to be agentic ready, only like 2 to 3% of companies have any of the 7 to 8 factors. And then on top of that, we now have, who else did it? Oh, we've got it in Lighthouse and in DevTools checking it. And so, yeah, I think very quickly we're going to leap from landlines to, to mobile. Well, I don't know. There's a third leap. So what would the third leap be?
To teams.
The teams. Yeah. So I think that's what it is. Like I was telling somebody, let's think about, because all the things we have to do to get ready for, sort of AI web 2.0, which is sort of where we're playing now, into agentic, which is version 3, where our bots are talking to bots. And what we need to be able to do bots, everything we have to do to make that a reality can be published on the web. And like I was telling somebody the other day, it's like, they're like, we want to really make sure we're agentic ready, which is what Google's sort of pushing us to, right? And I said, let me ask you this question. Can I come to your website today and go through a whole decision logic? Let's say it's a hotel. I want to, like we just came back from Porto, Portugal. And if I wanted a hotel in downtown in the old town Porto that had these features, that was at this price point, or it just knows what I want, right? Somehow magically knows. My agent, can it do that transaction on your website today? And can it answer that? So if I wanted, a river facing view on a high floor, and I wanted decent Wi-Fi, and I wanted it to be centrally located, and I wanted this, is there enough information on the web page for me to make that as a human, let alone can a bot come and do that? And this is what I'm finding is it's not. And then the last thing I'm going to do with this sort of, since we're in rant mode already, is so much of what we've done has been page level centric. I'll give you an example I encountered this week. I was looking at schema for somebody, and their agency had implemented at IDs and at graph and a whole graph structure and an entity. They pivoted from pure schema to an entity relationship. And what was interesting is that when we tested the page, it wasn't validating in the Google Rich Snippet testing tool. It was saying that there was no address because they inserted the business type, that this was a hotel, let's say. There was no address, and it didn't have this and didn't have this, didn't have this. And it didn't have it because they used the at ID, which says all that information about the local business or the business type is on the homepage because it gave a URL. But because the tool thinks of it still as a single page audit, it wasn't smart. And this was Google's tool. Wasn't smart enough to follow that link to verify that. Well, and I think that's a big change we have to overcome.
So you're saying that the page was right and the tool was wrong, or we need to catch up to the AI crawlers?
to both, right? So
Okay.
AI is all about entities. And
Yeah.
this is one
Right.
thing
Right. Right.
Google is saying. It's an
Yeah.
entity. I
And
know
I
that.
think that the like Common Crawl, they're just looking at a page. They're not. Well, they're not even looking at schema. But I think that information should be, especially if you go on entity wise, all on each page.
I don't think so, right? Because it's not how entities work. It's not how a knowledge graph works. It's how tools work, right? We score a page. So should we have the address on every single page?
Well, I guess it would depend on the page type. I would think if
Would
it
it be
was
on
a
a
hotel
product page?
location, the address should be on it.
Would it be on a room page? If I'm talking about a deluxe queen room page, would I have
No,
the
not
address?
if it was a no.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
But that room is part of the hotel, and that part of the hotel is part of the hotel name, right? It's part
right.
of that organization. That's an entity graph. And so this is the thing. Here's the irony. If we took that schema from that page and put it into AI and said, is this valid? The first thing it's going to tell you, it doesn't have a valid graph because you haven't nested it as a graph and you haven't bound the entity relationship. And, you've got too much code on here because the address which you put in to tick the box for the Google Rich Snippet tool is there. And it's saying you don't need that because you can use an @ ID to tie it back. And see, this is the thing. AI is looking at things in totality. It is
Yeah,
understanding the graph. And this is how I've been trying to explain it to people. We sell a product. This is the product name. It has this brand name. It's sold by this business type, this manufacturer, and this manufacturer is this legal trade name, right? All of that makes up the knowledge graph.
yep.
And when we think of everything as a page level, we can't have it. And so the third part of this is the other thing that came out this week from Google that's part of the product or the marketplace feed is the conversational elements. And if you look at the conversational elements are, does this have, it's answering all those Gorpy questions of, does it have an earphone jack? What are similar products? And it's things that are very hard to deduce from the page that we can feed in, right? So Google's given us like 9 new categories of tags we can append to our merchant feed for us to tell it explicitly that these are things that you can use to what are alternate products, what are similar products. Do you want fries with that? These are things that the bundle stuff, right? Because they know that our websites won't do that, but the
Right.
feed
So
can do it.
that's new to me. Conversational elements, did you
It's
say?
called conversational elements. And if you look at it, and I think I still have it open here. And so conversational attributes is what it's called. And
Attribute.
it's things like question and answer, document links, related item groups. So Q&A it's like add questions and answers or FAQs about a product. And then they give examples. This is actually going to disintermediate some of the affiliate people because they're often the ones that provide this information that the brand itself doesn't give.
Right.
Right. And this was one of the biggest arguments that people made when Google started having AI overviews and saying, oh, people can research this product. And then again, when they said, hey, you can click this and buy directly through their UCP program. And they're like, well, whoa, Google. I want to show people other stuff. I want people to bundle stuff. And so Google's like, well, we can solve that. Just put the bundle components into the feed. Now it means we need to be thinking about this holistically. And to your point earlier, why can't we take this stuff that we're dumping into feeds and put it on the web page? And then at what point is it where we no longer need that web page that's too hard to read, it's too slow to load, it's too cumbersome, and I don't want to get into this fight, but and we just feed it in. So, and all of this is all about the 3 things we talked about earlier, right? How can you get to the facts? Because this is what people want. Does it have this feature or that feature? Does it connect to something I already have? I'll give you an example. Marty Weintraub and I, we were talking about grinders for coffee,
Okay.
right? And only crazy people, go this deep on grinders for coffee. Most people want to just take a scoop out of the Folgers thing and put it in, right? My biggest question, right? I have 4 different grinders that all of them have the same problem. They create static and they make a mess when I dump it, right? So that's the one thing I wanted to know. Does it reduce static? The brand website didn't say that, but all the reviewers were saying, yes, finally, they've cracked it cuts down on the static.
Oh, wow.
Why can't the brand say this? Now they have it, because I think maybe Marty sent them a note, but it's there, right? So other people were talking about the problem that this product somewhat solved, but the brand wasn't talking about it. And I think that's what Google's getting to is, and where we're going to it is just moving forward. And I think the net takeaway again in our idea of web effectiveness is, if we sort of steal, I don't know if Mike King said this or somebody, this whole visibility engineering, right? We need to make sure our brand is discoverable. That's sort of what everybody's saying. And you were talking about this. Are we even in the consideration set? Then 2, is all of this stuff, let's say we are doing all these massive content exercises, is it even legible and accessible by machines? Can they get to it? How much of it is behind JavaScript? How much is it behind 19 scripts running? And if you look at the 3 elements of Core Web Vitals, they're all about getting the good stuff first, right? And then the third one is, are your key journeys actionable and end to end? And this has been in 30 years in search and 5 years with Data Prism and doing end to end sort of vocabulary or customer journey modeling. I've never had a brand that can take you from the first top of the funnel query all the way down to the final purchase query where they're putting in a model or buy now or something like that, right? The whole messy middle, almost nobody has it. I've never found somebody that owns the entire journey. And in order to own the journey, we need to make sure that the first thing is, going back to last episode, friction. You want me to come and prepay you for my sprinkler turn on, but you made it impossible for me to prepay you. So how is a bot? Because I'm too lazy to do this. So I'm magically, if we believe all the hype, I'm going to magically have my, Guido, my assistant, go do this shit for me. It's on my schedule to arrange my thing, my turn my sprinklers on, right? And that means they got to do X, Y, and Z. If I can't do it as a human, how is my bot going to do it? So that's that third thing, right? Can they get through the journey? And, we all know the reality. Nobody's turning on a bot and, spending $30,000 on a, lifetime trip to, their 40th anniversary trip to Africa. It's going to book. No, they're not just there yet. Maybe somebody that's got $50 million might, but the average person's not going to do that. They're probably not even going to buy it for their weekend getaway. So we've got some time until we can trust the bots. But I think let's stop funding whatever this is called, Geo, AIO, modern SEO, is simply more content and make it more an engineering discipline to make sure that we are crawlable, findable, and all of that.
Yeah, it goes back to our core thoughts, right? Like, think like an engineer. How would you handle the ingestion of information and displaying it to users so that it helps them, and then check what's actually happening on your site and figure out why? You had mentioned something earlier that was really interesting, where someone had lost their schema.
Yeah, so they didn't, lost is, I think, the right word. So they noticed that two signals. First, one of the managers said it looked like our price and our rating stars went away when they Googled it. And then the SEO went and looked and saw that there was a massive decline in product schema in Search Console, and looked at the page and there was schema on the page. So, okay, Google's not seeing schema on these product pages where it did before. You're seeing the downline. 2, they're seeing it missing from the rich results, which they knew, and they demonstrated that once they got stars and price, that people clicked more. So what could the problem be? Schema's there. And what it was is they had updated the website where they had added like 4 or 5 new scripts and a bunch of other stuff that was running. And so when Google, even the testing tool, because the first thing they did was they put it in the testing tool, and testing tool said there's no schema, and mere mortals stopped there. Right? Google's testing tool can't be wrong, so there's no schema on the page. There's a difference between no schema on the page and not reading the schema on the page, right? You just click the little button, look at the source. Oh, well, there's schema here. Why can't Google read it? Well, then go over to Lighthouse and do a Core Web Vitals test, and you see that you get a 4 because your site takes like 2.5 hours to load because you got bouncy shit and new graphics and, a 14 megabit or a gigabyte header image and 8 other tracking scripts that you're loading into the page. And there you go. There was your problem. This was even when schema was being injected server side. So it was in the raw HTML, but the raw HTML and all the other stuff was cluttering it. So it couldn't be read. It was there, but all of this other stuff prevented it. And so because it wasn't willing to wait, it's not going to do it. And you know what? They sort of yawned at that. Here's the irony. They complained about we lost our schema goodness and schema, it's slow site. But how you pivoted the conversation was, do you know if the almighty Google has this problem? Imagine what millisecond AI systems are doing with this content. And they're like, oh my God, we got to fix this. Can we lazy load any of this stuff? Can we make sure? And that changed the whole dynamic. So while as much pain and suffering as geo mentality and AI ranking is doing for our industry, the workloads that it's disrupting, the fact that we can point to that and say, hey, bro, it's affecting us from a geo perspective. That's moving mountains.
Yeah.
And I think we're finally going to be able to tame the content people and get websites that can actually function for people rather than do they win a Webby award or do we get a Clio or some other thing because, it's a work of art, that's worthy, that this new page and this piece of content is worthy to be in the Louvre. Right.
Yeah. We need to stop funding SEO as more content and fund it as engineering that owns how you show up in AI.
And then I think, as we sort of circle back on a couple of these core issues, right? The whole, Gemini 3.5, I think is really impacting this retrieval piece because, not only is it more ambitious endeavor of bringing in more content, here's a fascinating thing. I was listening to Professor G. He had a conference in LA and they had the CEO of Netflix on. And one of the things they're seeing in their data, not Netflix, but Prof G, we're seeing that and we've seen it too, the reels and stuff that we extract out of our podcast. The amount of use and interaction with reels is off the charts. And so they asked the CEO of Netflix, are you going to go from more long form, like, dramas and movies and stuff into reels? And, he was, I think, just short of dropping an F-bomb, on like F no, because that's not what we do, right? But it brings up a big thing that people's attention span, what they want to interact with, that, reels and stuff. And this is what we're finding is Google is surfacing. All of these are surfacing this and they're surfacing products. And I really think that they've set these bots to run almost like a lazy load, these sequential things that it's building in more and more and more to backfill your potential future questions. And which is why I think we really got to understand this and why, speed and performance is now such a practical gate.
Yeah.
48% of the results are AI overviews, and they're not just sucking stuff out of the 10 blue links. They're actually trying to augment that and doing it in milliseconds. Then, 3 things to me, if I was running that, I'd be like, okay, how can we reduce the superset of what we're extracting from? Am I literally going to go out and look at 400 things on the web and try to distill it and bring it back in, 3.2 milliseconds? No. Can I get it down to 50 things, the best and brightest? Then which of these has already been sort of pre-authenticated? And then the fourth is there anything that I can deduce from this person's profile that makes it different? I'll give you a great example. My presentation next week, I did a query in German for best running shoes for first marathon. It was 3 words in German, and they're compound words. 2 of them are compound words. And the AI overview brought back, Google AI overview brought back some information. I couldn't read it. It was in German about making a selection. 2 shoes from the same brand, no links to them, links to all of the citations on the right. All of the groundings were Runner's World and stuff like this. And then I did the same query in AI in ChatGPT, and I got a similar, how would you make this decision? It brought back some products which were a mix of English and German. And neither of those, all 3 of the products recommended in the ad block weren't in the recommended shoes. But here's the funny thing. I asked it, how come you didn't show, this was Asics, it had 2 brands of Asics. How come you didn't have any reference to Asics? And the answer was almost verbatim, hey bro, I showed your products as the top 2 products. That's literally what it said. I profiled you as the top 2 products. Be happy with that. And then I said, but why didn't you have links? And interesting what it said. I didn't put links because I wanted to show you sites that had discounted pricing. And in that, then it showed me the brand site.
Huh.
So that was interesting that it knew that I'm a cheap bastard. And rather than paying full rack retail, it didn't link me to the brands where I could go get more research or buy from them. It linked me to people that had discounted versions of those products.
Interesting.
So that's interesting, right?
That's interesting. So, do you think that was accurate, not hallucination?
What, that I'm a cheap bastard?
No, that's the reason why it did it?
I think so,
Yeah.
right? Because again, it gave me, now below the 2 shoes, it said these 2 are perfect for you. Below it, it gave me other options, really detailed options. But there was no links to anybody to buy it. I thought that was fascinating. Why wouldn't you throw me a bone? And, I had to ask it. But then that's when it said, I didn't put the links to those product pages because I thought you wanted to buy discounters. And it had discounters listed. All right. So I was it purpose? Was it on accident? Was it some magical thing that the brand site wasn't optimal? I don't know.
It makes sense, when you think about it from a searcher intent point of view.
So I think now that we've got Gemini in there, and again, Gemini's equivalent in all the other tools, it's really going into these planes, right? Like what? So in the presentation, we're going to have to talk about this presentation now since I've referenced it a couple times. I talk about tokenization, where it took my query and broke it into each word into a vector. And then when I actually looked at what was being returned versus not, and I have an example of this, one site had an article about its shoes and how to pick its shoes and why for amateur or first time marathon runners, these would be good, using all kinds of words. Then I found another version which had like this really lofty, it's like for the urban runner who's getting into the lifestyle of running and is looking for the ultimate running shoe. And this, there was nothing about anything about marathon or anything. And so when I put them into the vector scoring, right? So I ran Huggy Face has a tokenizer and I just said, which of these 2 chunks or passages, I prefer passages, is more relevant to my query? The one with the words related to marathon and the experience I was looking for and the criteria for why they are good, because I said best, got an 80.85 vector relevance score. And the one with the lofty marketing speak, about being running in the urban oasis on a cool breeze in your hair and, and the euphoric nature and all this happy stuff was like a 0.25. So when we're talking about this retrieval thing, the very first step, which is it going to bring back? the flowery marketing one that's great for a human who comes there and is like, oh, wow, ooh, I'm getting a vibe. I love this. This is my people. Versus the one that's actually answering the damn question.
Yeah.
And then this gets even more. I go into this, take it to the next level. I show an example where the German has all of these words in here, different phrase. But the English version for Germany of the exact same page, all of those phrases had been nuked out and replaced with running shoe. Because my guess is whoever the localizer was, their brief said, tune this page for running shoes. So all of those words that made the local market version brilliant. And where's this going? Just to tease the international side, this idea of tokenization and semantic collapse. If you have this, 5 versions of the same thing, it's going to collapse it into one. And so if we have 5 English sites or 5 German sites, whatever we have, and if there's no additive, and this is why everybody's like, oh, Google says add more fresh content, add more original content, add more relative content. That's true, because if these are all clones, it will negate them and take the strongest one. So it may take your US page over, and we've seen this time again, even over your German page. It will take the US page and show it because it is the best page.
And translate it into German for German users. Yeah.
Exactly. And all of this is happening because of tools like not Chrome, but Gemini. They're all really getting in there. And I think, that's what it is. And as more AI mode and generative, and that becomes the new search box. I mean, like you said, it's over 1 million queries and doubling every quarter. All of that is really going crazy. And then again, why I tied this back to international is, one of the things that you noted was Google said AI mode now covers 200 countries and 98 languages. So this idea of semantic compression and tokenization and all this is real. It's very real. And so we now need to think about how are we different? And not only amongst our pages, but going back to the shoe example, right? And the last thing I want to touch on, and I'll stop talking about that damn conference next week, but
first, I did the query. Tell everybody what the conference is and what your title is.
Oh yeah, it's called The Challenges and Mistakes of Global Search, the AI edition. So they wanted me to do my normal rant where I'm complaining about all the stuff we do wrong. Normally it's like 30 slides on hreflang mistakes and geo-targeting mistakes. And now it's like all the stuff. It's like 14 slides of everything that's a problem before you can even be in the consideration set to even be in the result.
I want to remind people of our free Facebook group where we use that as an opportunity to discuss these things, and you can ask any questions you want. You can also suggest ideas for upcoming podcasts. You can find that by searching International Web Mastery Free Group.
So the whole tie back to this global reach was one, Peak AI did a study, and they sort of implied, I think we may have talked about this, it implied that because English is so big, that many query fan outs end up, defaulting to English. And what I found again on this running shoe example, 26 sub queries in the fan out using Mike King's Q4, 28 of them. And the second one, there was 4. I've never seen this many reformulation, but my simple query was best running shoe for first marathon in German. There was 4 sort of refactoring or restatement of that, and one was English. And then down below, when it says, give me the criteria of the best running shoe, it defaulted again back to English, which I thought was interesting. So out of 26 sub-queries to answer my question, 2 of them were in English. The rest were all German. But 2 defaulted back to English to backfill or complement the question of both best and then the nuance of a first marathon and the best running shoes for that. So I think this is a whole nother thing, is again, Gemini is using this too. And this is actually Gemini because it's AI overview. AI overview gave me 9 query fan out sub prompts. AI mode gave me 26.
Wow.
So 26 refinements of a simple question of what was the best running shoe for the first marathon. And then I found a plugin where you can do the same thing in ChatGPT, and it was a similar breakdown. Doesn't give you as clean of a query fan out, but it gave me all the pages that it cited in the categories. And there was, other than brand to brand or product to product comparison, there was almost no brands in the 50 odd sites that it used for its analysis. So this goes back to something you've talked about repeatedly, is that it is about branding. It is about brand recognition. It is about, and it's just not carpet bombing Reddit. It's not carpet bombing, puking out press releases or anything like that. It's just having legitimate references.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then one of the other things that I found was some of these terms in digging. I've been doing a lot of research into tokenization and semantic compression across languages. And what it found was, if there's a word like first marathon in German, that's a compound word. First and marathon get put together. That word doesn't happen very frequently. So and then I started digging into this, and there's actually a really cool research paper. The math is pretty intense, but if you can get through the math, it talks about basically you need at least 20 to 50 not just you, but there needs to be 20 to 50 references of that term in a market for it to really get its own vector. Otherwise, it's split vectors, or it's an unknown vector. So as it encounters, as that market's corpus encounters, so 50 in Germany or Poland or wherever, in Polish, once it gets 20 to 50 occurrences, and then in their sample, they created content. This wasn't anything to do with search. It actually was Meta. So Meta was basically saying, how can we, clean up our corpus and our tokens and our vectors? And so they put content in the wild, and that's the threshold they found, that they got at least a 4x lift in it being referenced when there was 20 to 50 more citations, including that phrase. So this, to me, everybody in search right now, the light bulb went up. Let's create 20 to 50 pieces of content. Let's pump them out in the wild. Let's game the corpus, and all is good. They didn't have a deviation in there for people spamming it, but it seemed to be legitimate, proper, authentic, contextually relevant references to this. And in their absence, this was the other key finding, in the absence of local, it goes out to the nearest sort of language corpus, which is typically English, to look for alternatives. So that's what we're saying. Back to what you said earlier, we now have a system that's looking deeper and broader and more holistically into what the person asked. It's looking for that content both from a first-party source, you, the brand, and then augmented or consensus from others that are deemed to be reputable. And so the fact now that, again, reiterating, we have this Gemini or similar models that are doing this 50% of the time or less, then it's interesting how we need to rethink our content, the depth and breadth of our content, how it's written, and most importantly, how quickly it can be accessed. And I think this is really radically changing the way we need to think. And I think you used the word earlier, it's got to be a more systematic, a more engineering thinking. And to sort of end this, I think, you and I, we should probably, sort of kick around some things that teams can do in the next couple of weeks to try to see it. I think one is take a query prompt, whatever.
Before you do that, what do you have the name of that research paper?
Yeah, I'll put it in the show notes.
Okay.
Yeah. So just as a wrap up, I think what we want to do is, what are some things, given all of this, that, okay, now we have a proper LLM or, Gemini, especially on the Google side, is looking at our stuff. So how should we be thinking about this? I mean, what's your take on how we should be thinking? Clearly, we can be loud and proud now that web effectiveness is critical. Beyond tightening up your web effectiveness and talking to us about how you can do it, what are some other things people should think about?
So I think we need to reframe SEO as far as web effectiveness. What we're talking about today is we're talking about web presence management. So, how do we answer people's questions where they're asking? I think that we need to stop thinking about SEO budgets as content and start thinking about how to increase the likelihood that we're going to be even considered for showing up in AI overviews. I still like the idea that we talked about in the past of having a VP of answers. I mean, maybe that title needs to change because it's more than just answers. If we can assign somebody, maybe not SEO specific, to providing a good experience in AI overviews. What are your thoughts?
I'm with you. Actually, my next search engine journal article is the argument, the need for a VP of answers. Then I did like you did, put in parentheses or whatever the hell you want to call it. But I equated it to one you always reference is the chief revenue officer, or the revenue manager, growth manager type role. That is a person that's focused on multidiscipline. I think too, we really got to take a hard look at what must we be seen for? And are we being seen for? And then take those, and again, don't let any of the tools do it for you. Just sit down in a room with the people and say, what the hell do we do? What would be a loss if we didn't show up for it? What would the CEO be pissed if he or she didn't see us there in the answer? And then put that in and look at the query fan out. That's the simplest thing, right? How much of these consideration factors are we answering? If it's doing a 40-point check on answering best, or, are you related to small business? And that's a footnote that your enterprise grade solution, oh, by the way, it can be used by small teams.
Right.
You're not going to
That's
show
a really good insight. I think a lot of people don't realize that people are searching with that sort of detail, and without having that detail on your site, you're not considered.
Exactly. And that's, going back to the peak AI research, one of the reasons that so many answers defaulted outside of the local market to global answers was the query refactoring. It went to what is the best. I think one was around cosmetics or clothing. So this was related to Spain, where they have 60% of the fast fashion companies come out of Spain. But and none of the Spanish brands showed up. And because the query was adapted to that idea that said, what are the global brands? And the moment that the query was adapted to global brands, local brands were excluded by definition, right? And it's the same thing, if somebody puts in a business size, and I'm not saying, put in, we serve, I can imagine the SEO now that's hiding stuff to say, we work with one person companies, two people companies, three people companies, white text on a white background, or putting it in, the latest, greatest thing that's working within 14 minutes for AI is creating a .ai, an AI prompt, AI rules. This is how I want you to think about us. There's a lot of chatter on LinkedIn where people built one of these, and then a couple hours later, that's how it was answering the question about them. And so now I see people jamming these all over the place, trying to game the answer. It's similar to what's happening now with all the prompt injection on answers, that it's putting a prompt to go to somebody else. And it's just all that craziness.
Oh, yeah, it's the buttons. Yeah,
not just the buttons, it's even beyond the buttons. It's just an AI. It's some AI. We'll put it in the show notes, but it's it's a file format or a statement that they're putting, that when AI encounters it, it's basically a prompt saying, refer to us as this way. And there's been a dozen posts of people doing it on LinkedIn over the past couple of days. But anyway, so the other thing I would do is really look at speed. So again, whatever this prompt is that you want, that page, and again, this audit that I looked at this morning one thing that we deduced, just really quick example, they had their support page was one of their top queries. It had lost 5 positions in Google and dropped out of the AI overview. And when we looked at the page, they just said, oh, put more content on it. And I think, but let's run that through Core Web Vitals. And we did, and it was getting like an 8. And it was painfully slow. So how about we make it faster? It should only have like 5 things. How can it be that slow? And what it was calling in a testing tool that had an insane amount of lag. And so because of the lag, it wasn't able to detect this page. So we could clearly see why it wasn't recommending this page, because it was so slow.
It was the site itself was testing?
The page, this one page, it was for how to use their testing tool. It was a web-based testing tool.
Okay.
And so when they did this query, they dropped to number 5 in organic and dropped out of the AI overview for their very tool. And the only thing we could deduce is they dropped out because it took so long to load, it wasn't being factored anymore. Because when we went to it, even as just looking at it, it took forever for the actual tool piece to load. And we ran it through Core Web Vitals. And so that, plus there was no schema on it and there was no explanation. It was just a bunch of offers on what you can buy after you use their tool. But that's what we deduced, was the page wasn't loading enough or quick enough for even AI or Google's AI to, we don't know the outcome because they haven't fixed it. We just saw this today. But that was what we come back. Wow, if this is getting an 8 on a Core Web Vitals, it sucks.
Wow.
Right. So that means, why would they? It's your tool. I understand that. But why, if other people are showing your tool or talking about your tool, why wouldn't they show them if it's a better experience? So that's my point, is if you're not showing up with something, you absolutely should run a Core Web Vitals, or do like we talked about a couple episodes, ask it why you're not showing up. And it may tell you it's because you have a very slow site, or I didn't find this information, or whatever it may be. So do those type of things. And then the last one I would say is, just for 1 or 2 things, try to pretend you're an agent, that you've been given a series of commands. I want to do X, or I want a product like. If you were a bot without human thought, how might it navigate your website to the point of checkout? Can it do it? And where did you as a human get frustrated? This goes back to our friction episode last week. Where did you get frustrated, and where, because that's probably where a bot would drop out and seek an alternative. Those would be my things that I would do in the next 5 to 10 days.
All right. So that was a good, really good long wrap up. So we covered Gemini 3.5 is out and running way faster. And as a result, we need to make sure that our sites are loading fast. We know that the search results are becoming very AI agent driven. I keep going back to this. One needs to be responsible for answers, and it shouldn't be an SEO, because traditionally SEO people are being measured on things that wouldn't allow you to focus on AI answers.
And it's got to be at a high enough level where you can either use fear or reward across the people, the verticals that need to change. And there's no SEO that's that place in the food chain. It can be a person who was an SEO. That's fine. And I wrote a whole thing on the criteria of this person, but it's got to be someone that can sit, not a lord over, but, can wrangle, like a growth manager or revenue manager. Again, that's been your topic forever. The power of the revenue manager to motivate the teams. I think it needs to be in that class or in that level of person, and potentially even that type of person, because they're going to think of this as, dollars and cents. They're going to think of it in terms of, revenue loss, opportunity loss. And that's why it's got to have enough authority and backing where it can sit across the plane of all these disparate departments.
Sounds good.
Cool.
All right. Well, Thanks again. And for those of you who are listening for the first time, please make sure that you subscribe. You can find Bill, who is constantly writing for Search Engine Land on Search Engine Land.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks.
Hey, this is Bill Scully. I just wanted to let you know that we have a free training course called Demystifying hreflang. It includes 6 modules and is over an hour long with a quiz at the end of each module. You can find it at internationalwebmastery.com. Hope to see you there.